Oh, so that's how you fry an egg. Yeah, I'm definitely still using too much horse blood then. Yikes. What are you doing here? We've already done the top 10 best metal albums of 2022. What more could you possibly want to talk about? Wait a minute. If we've done the top 10 best metal albums of the year video, then that means... Yo! That means it's time for the top 10 best non-metal albums of 2022. Hell yes, because contrary to popular belief, the Metal Meltdown does not exclusively listen to heavy metal. We exclusively talk about it, but we don't exclusively listen to it. This is exciting! It may not feel as exciting as the top 10 best metal albums video because I'm not running around like an idiot with a suit, but it's still pretty exciting. In fact, the only reason I'm not running around with a suit right now is because A, I fucked up my leg, and B, my suit's at the dry cleaners. So, yeah, if it wasn't for those two things, I would be running around like an idiot with my suit on. But this is still special, still exciting, still great. Let's do it. I'm gonna put this over here. Let's talk about the top 10 best non-metal albums of 2022. The best hip-hop, alternative rock, indie, punk, jazz, pop, country, R&B, and so much more. As per the norm with every top 10 video I do on the Metal Meltdown, this is not a ranked list. I'm just going to talk about each album in order of release, with albums having been released in January or February at the beginning of the year being talked about first, and albums that were released later in the year being talked about last. I will simply tell you what my favorite of all of these albums is when we arrive to it. And also just a reminder that I am not God and my word is not law. It is okay to disagree. There's no need to have a little freak out just because our lists look a little bit different. That's fine. We all just want to talk about great music, so let's do that. Let's keep the good times a-rolling. Alright, so first up, honorable mentions? That sounds like a good idea. That sounds like a very good idea. These are albums that I thoroughly enjoyed but did not make the final list. Unlike the top 10 best metal albums video, I only have 3 honorable mentions, the first of which is Soul Sold. Separately from Freddie Gibbs, of all the albums we're talking about, this one came the closest to being on my top 10. It's smart, it's clever, I love the versatile, lush, dynamic production, and Freddie Gibbs' very introspective and personal lyrics. I like the concept of the album. I like how he uses a casino and gambling and finance to kind of deconstruct things about his life and to give us some more insight as to who he is as a human being. I like all of the collaborations on the record. Just a really well done modern hip-hop record, but with old school heart and soul and spirit. My second honorable mention is the official soundtrack to Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. Director Ryan Coogler and Academy Award-winning composer Ludwig Göransson went out of their way to bring in new influences from world music, from African and Latino and Spanish music. They used it not just to make a great album, to bring a bunch of great producers and singers and songwriters and DJs together, but also to kind of like sonically retell the story of Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. A lot of the songs on the album resonate deeply with a lot of the themes of the movie, and in some cases are intrinsically tied to key moments from the movie, and as such carry a lot of the same heart and weight. Also, it's just incredibly well organized and incredibly dynamic and interesting. There are so many unique styles and sounds here. And my third honorable mention is Innate Passage from Elder. We did review it here on this channel, but I still would say that this is not really a metal album. This leans closer into the realms of progressive rock and psychedelic rock than progressive metal. But irregardless of what sub-genre we want to fucking throw this under, it's still a fantastically, meticulously crafted album filled with amazing, dreamy, wild soundscapes and some of the best musicianship I've heard on any prog album, not just in 2022, but perhaps in a while. Which is saying a lot because honestly it was a pretty exciting year for prog. Porcupine Tree came back, Devin Townsend put out a really heartfelt record, Polyphia broke the rules of the game with shit like ABC, but like, this is the best one. This is the best one. This is the best. Period. Sorry, folks. Booyah! Now that that's out of the way, now that we are done with the honorable mentions, let's officially get started with the top 10 best non-metal albums of 2022 list, starting with Ants from Up There, the sophomore studio album from Black Country New Road, released February 4th via Ninja Tune. Probably the most widely talked about post-rock album of 2022, one of the most critically acclaimed albums of the year overall, and for very good reason. This is an incredibly well constructed and written and produced and executed album in almost every single regard. The writing, the performances, the concept, lyricism, production. It's lush, tender, heartfelt, very somber. It conveys a lot of emotion and has a lot of power behind it. Horns and strings and woodwinds and guitars and drums and vocals work in unison, a really beautiful dynamic unison to deliver some of the most interesting and impactful rock songs of 2022. Chaos Space Marines, Concord, Goodwill Hunting, The Place Where He Inserted the Blade, the latter of which I think is the best song, or at least one of the best that Black Country New Road have ever written and delivered. The closing track, Basketball Shoes, is stunning well. I love how the strings swell and ooze with so much like love and heart and pain. Like, it's a really beautiful, devastating number. It's unpredictable without being overwhelming. It's diverse and dynamic without being too weird, too confusing. And the vibe of this is amazing. Like, it has this really natural, organic, live kind of feel. It's not really raw, like it's still very clean and polished, but the way that it kind of flows out, the way that it kind of launches forward from your speakers, it really does kind of feel like listening to a really intimate live performance. Just a really incredible album. Unfortunately, the band's final, with Isaac Woods on guitar and lead vocals, very unfortunate, but I've no doubt that these guys will recover. I've no doubt that these guys will continue to release some really creative and powerful stuff even without Isaac. Next up, we have Diaspora Problems from Soul Glow, released March 25th via Epitaph Records. Without question, the best hardcore or punk album of 2022, and perhaps one of the best hardcore or punk albums I've heard in a very long time. It channels a lot of the aggression and the energy and the poignancy and the urgency that I would expect of classic hardcore from bands like Bad Brains and even like very early Suicidal Tendencies, and it brings that into the modern era with electronic music, with rap influences, with this really harsh, in-your-face, angular production, and some really powerful lyrics. It kind of reminds me of what Horror were doing on United Shades of Horror. It also kind of reminds me of what Backwash has been doing on some of her more recent projects, albeit with a much heavier emphasis on punk and hardcore. A lot of scorching screams and some really great rap flows, and like a lot of punishing instrumentals, like Gold Chain Punk, which opens the album on a really like kind of self-demeaning and like punchy note. There's also Thumbsucker, which indulges in like classic punk and old school post-hardcore influences. Driponomics, which is where, you know, the comparisons to Backwash become extremely transparent. I mean, it is just this like gnarly, dirty kind of electronic, angry industrial hip-hop rager. We Want's Revenge, The Fangs I Carry, the spiritual level of gang shit, Fucked Up If True, just tons of really badass songs. Honestly, you'd have to be at least a little bit lame if you're not jamming to little bits and pieces of this thing. It's just that gnarly. It's just that cool. Next up, we have The Unraveling of Pup the Band from Pup, released April 1st via Little Dipper and Rise Records. Wisely, Pup have expanded on everything that made 2019's Morbid Stuff such a vibrant and exciting and impactful record in all kinds of new and interesting ways. It's funnier, it's brighter, it's also more expressive at times, bringing in more keyboards and more string and orchestral arrangements. You have a trio of songs, 4 chords part 2, and 4 chords part 3, which are very tongue-in-cheek, very self-aware. There's a lot of, like, irony and a little bit of, like, cynicism towards the recording industry here. But it's filtered through, like, some pretty straightforward and gentle kind of pop music balladry, and it culminates in the album's closing track, which is Pup the Band Incorporated is filing for bankruptcy, which is like this abrasive, wailing, full-on punk jam from Pup. There's also Waiting, which has some aggressive acoustic guitar strumming. Incredibly fun, incredibly groovy, great sing-along chorus. Robot Writes a Love Song is great as well. I like some of the kind of slower, more robotic sequences. Like, there's a lot of, like, soundscapes and ideas that wouldn't be out of place on a more straightforward kind of indie rock or indie pop song. It's a little moody, but it's smooth, and it's kind of cute and charming. And, you know, there's also a lot of just, like, really fun, over-the-top Pup-style ragers, you know, like Matilda, Relentless. The album's official opening track as well, Totally Fine, which is just fucking great. It's far more than totally fine, as the song would imply. Just a really great pop-punk album with Pup doing everything they do best, just doing it with a little bit more in the sound and in the concept and in the overall vibe. This album is great. It proves to me, once again, quite frankly, that Pup are the best modern pop-punk band, and there's nothing out there that could change my mind, quite frankly. Next up, we have Bronco, the sophomore studio album from South African-Canadian country artist Orville Peck, released April 8th via Columbia and Sub Pop. I'm a big fan of everything Orville Peck does. His 2019 record, Pony, and his 2020 EP, Show Pony, are without question some of the best modern country that you can find. And yes, it's because of the production and the arrangements and all so on and so forth, but it's mostly because of Orville Peck's just absolutely magnificent voice. He channels a lot of classic country and a lot of, like, classic rock and roll as well in his vocals to incredible, satisfying effect. Think Elvis meets Roy Orbison with maybe just a little bit of Jim Morrison as well. Not only is that thankfully all intact on Bronco, this is quite possibly the most confident and the most proud that Orville Peck has ever sounded, and that translates to a lot of the songwriting as well. It's a little bit more poignant, it's a little bit more bold, it's a little bit more raucous, almost channeling some country rock or some southern rock at times. Take, for instance, in the album's roaring and anthemic title track, Bronco, which is just overflowing with spirit and heart and power. There's also Daytona Sand, which constantly builds on these fast, galloping acoustic guitars and these epic melodies. There's also Come On Baby Cry, which has a bit of a old-school 1950s vibe and swing and groove to it. Then there's Let Me Drown and The Curse of the Blackened Eye, which are these very dark and evocative, minimalistic country ballads, which is where Orville Peck can really show off just how powerful his voice really is. Just incredible stuff, man. The amount of growth I've seen from Orville Peck in a relatively small amount of time is honestly remarkable. And if I were a young country singer or songwriter right now, I'd be paying very close attention to Orville Peck, because this man never misses. This man never slips. This man never fucks up. He is on a goddamn roll. Next up, we have Preacher's Daughter, the debut studio album from Ethel Cain, released May 12th via Daughters of Cain Records. And, wow, what a doozy of an album. Where do I even begin describing this? While it does have a central concept and is rooted primarily in a lot of, like, singer-songwriter music, it also spans a lot of different themes and tones and moods and styles and subgenres. Americana music, indie pop, goth rock, like really lush orchestral ballads and dark wave and slowcore and industrial. The songs are very long, cinematic, and have a lot of atmosphere and weight to them. The story of the album itself deals with Ethel Cain struggling with religion, struggling to find happiness, and kind of just going on this teenage adventure, and at the end of the album finding herself in the hands of a gruesome psychopath, only to be murdered in the album's closing moments. At times, it kind of feels like if Lingua Ignota tried to write a Bruce Springsteen record. And in fact, not so coincidentally, one of the opening tracks, American Teenager, even channels a lot of the energies and vibes I would expect of late 1980s Bruce Springsteen, with these synth-led melodies and this very bombastic, inspired chorus. It also kind of channels some other American pop and rock of the time, there's this shredding guitar work that reminds me a lot of, like, Don't Stop Believing from Journey. Definitely the album's most upbeat and, like, optimistic moment on the record, which also helps in making the rest of it so crushing and so dreadful. Because you really watch this character filled with so much hope and happiness and potential just being crushed by the world around her. The album is very long, unnecessarily so, at 75 minutes, and as such, I'm tempted to say that you could cut stuff from this, but I don't really know what, because everything is important and everything is interesting and everything is captivating. Absolutely one of the most unique albums I've heard this year in any genre. Definitely the most unique debut album I've heard this year, period, and perhaps altogether in a while. I don't know what the fuck the future holds for Ethel Cain, but I'm pumped to hear it. I'm super pumped. I'll be paying very close attention. Next up, we have Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers from Kendrick Lamar, released May 13th via PD Lang, Aftermath, TDE, and Interscope. And we have arrived at what might be my favorite non-metal album of the year. I think so. I'm tempted to say so. Fuck it, I'm gonna say so. I love this album. And I would even go as far as to say this is one of Kendrick's most important records to date. Kendrick Lamar is consistently someone who has written with a lot of urgency. His material is very heartfelt, very introspective, very political, dealing with a lot of controversial issues and challenging to talk about topics and such: police brutality, discrimination, the struggles of being black and poor in the United States of America. How greed and sex and religion and ego can corrupt people. The dude's a superstar. You probably know his material by now. To Pimp a Butterfly. Damn. He even worked on the first Black Panther soundtrack. And you know, it's like I said, it's a pretty bold statement for me to say that this is his most powerful record to date, that this is his most important record to date, more specifically. But I stand by it, because while he does tackle a lot of those issues again on this album, ultimately this is more so about Kendrick Lamar trying to be a better man, trying to be a better father, and doing so by looking at issues within his family, within his community, issues that continue to face his people who are close to him, his friends, his relatives, and trying to find peaceful and meaningful solutions to all of these problems so as to create a more positive future for his children and for the next generation, for our children collectively. This is less about beats and bars and more about confronting generational abuse and trauma and dealing with a lot of complicated and convoluted issues that Kendrick's family and many other families may face, that Kendrick's community and many other communities may face. We Cry Together, for instance, goes as far as to act out a dispute between like a husband and wife in pretty grandiose and disturbingly realistic fashion. Now, that's not to say that there aren't beats and bars, because there are. There are a lot of really catchy, really fun songs, like United in Grief, for instance, N95, Purple Hearts. These are all songs that hit hard musically and lyrically. The Hearts Part 5 as well, which closes out digital editions of this album and might be one of the best songs Kendrick Lamar has ever written. I legit cried listening to this song the first time I heard it. It's beautiful. It's stunning. I love the percussion. I love the horns. I love the chorus. I love Kendrick's flow in this. There are a lot of rappers that go into very personal and controversial territory lyrically nowadays, and for the record, there were tons that went into those territories way back in the late 80s and 90s. It's not exactly brand new, but there are few, if anyone, frankly, that have gone to the levels of honesty and expression that Kendrick Lamar goes to on this album. And for that reason, this is my favorite non-metal album of 2022. I love it. A lot of people saying it's mid just because it's not To Pimp a Butterfly Part 2, just because it's not Good Kid, Mad City Part 2. If that's you, you're boring. Grow up. It's come on, man. Come on. Are you kidding? Are you kidding me? Come on. It's great. Check it out. Next up, we have Colder Streams, the 11th studio album from Canadian alternative psychedelic country crew the Sadies, released July 22nd via Dynalone Records. Now, truth be told, I've only recently come to really know about the Sadies, this long-running Canadian indie alt-country band whose genre is incredibly difficult to really define, but we'll get into that later. Point being, I don't really know much about them, didn't really know much about them until, like, relatively recently, and as such, I did not know or notice that their singer, Dallas Good, had passed away earlier this year at the age of 48 years old. Incredibly sad. 48 is far too young to go, in my opinion. At least Dallas gets to go out with a bang on this Sadies album, though. I mean, this is really an incredible record. A lot of really wild, frantic, over-the-top songwriting. A lot of different moods and energies and styles have been channeled here. Indie rock, country, psychedelic, alternative rock, some like classic rock, some southern rock. It's like equal parts Neil Young, Jimi Hendrix, Arcade Fire, with maybe just like a dash of the Grateful Dead and maybe even just a little extra small dash of like really early Lynyrd Skynyrd. I don't know, man. It's beautiful, it's vibrant, it's intimate. You know, the Sadies jokingly declared this the best album ever, and I don't quite agree with the sentiment, but I can definitely understand why someone would, because this is just exploding with emotion and just tons of great music. You've got Stop and Start, for instance, which is a hazy, smoky, slow-paced kind of acid rock burner. Message to Belial has some very gentle, intricate guitar chords and arrangements with some very smooth, if intentionally monotonous, vocal harmonies reminiscent of Simon and Garfunkel. No One's Listening, Cut Up High and Dry, So Far for So Few, indulge in like full-blown 60s rock nostalgia and psychedelia. And then there's end credits, which is just really stirring and cathartic and dramatic. No vocals whatsoever, just closing out on some really emotive and powerful instrumentals. Just a really great album. I love how this pulls together a lot of different styles and sounds from classic rock, from Canadian rock. A great tribute to Dallas Good, may he rest in peace. Next up, we have Hellfire from Black Midi, released July 22nd via Rough Trade Records, and it's fucking insane. Oh my god, I don't even know how to describe this record, let alone where to begin describing it. It's frantic and disorienting and angular. It's everything Cavalcade from last year did so well, but multiplied by 7. A convoluted and fascinating fusion of post-rock, math rock, art rock, experimental music, jazz fusion, weird spoken word style vocal passages, these like sporadic horns. There's thrashy guitars to be found at times and like really punky beats. There's also new influences coming in from country, flamenco, cabaret, traditional show tunes. It's wild and elaborate and evocative. It's Black Midi at their most Black Midiest. And I love it. It's an unpredictable roller coaster of experimental rock madness, and I love it. Welcome to Hell is, you know, a stunning display of spoken word, math rock, and art rock with a sudden divulge into almost Voivodian thrash metal near the end. Sugar Zoo has some of the speediest, most fast-paced instrumental work that I think I've heard outside of, like, technical death metal. Like, if Arcspire ever decided to go in the realms of art rock and math rock and post-rock, I'm certain it would sound at least a little bit like this. I mean, it just never, ever really stops, and amidst, like, the swirling crescendos and crushing waves of fast-paced math rock riffery madness, you know, there are these horns that are growing in the forefront of the sound and these very ominous spoken word vocals. There's The Race Is About to Begin, which, honest to God, does sound like Black Midi's interpretation of, like, a racing event. You know, like, you're at the dog tracks, and, you know, they just let that little rabbit loose, and instead of the regular announcer, it's Black Midi. It's just insane, man. I feel like saying anything more about this album is equivalent to spoiling the plot of, like, a really good movie. There's just so much, and I want you to discover it for yourself if you haven't already. Next up, we have Renaissance from Beyonce, released July 29th via Parkwood and Columbia. And, Yeah, even I'm shocked by the inclusion of this one. I like Beyonce. Who doesn't like Beyonce? She's a bad bitch. She's a queen. She's got an incredible voice. She's an icon. You know, I remember jamming Destiny's Child back in the day. I remember watching Dreamgirls when it was in theaters. I remember listening to Halo and Single Ladies on the radio and shit like that. I got nothing against Beyonce. But she's always, you know, just kind of not been there as far as the albums game is concerned, you know? It's always been like a bunch of singles and a bunch of cool little projects, but never an album that really grabbed me. Until Renaissance. Her most fluid, her most cohesive, her most confident, her most unique, full-blown album to date, with her catchiest songs, with her hardest beats, with her best vocals. This thing just oozes pride and sex and confidence, and I love it. I live for it. Slay. I love how it deals with pride and confidence and sexuality. I love Beyonce's incredible, like, optimistic spirit through this thing. I love how it's basically just a monument to black and queer talent, to the underdogs of like house and EDM and dance pop music. Tons of great songs on here. Cuff It, Break My Soul, Church Girl, Alien Superstar, America Has a Problem. A lot of really talented, really cool, really interesting people working behind the scenes on this thing. Niles Rodgers, Grace Jones, Skrillex, Honey Dijon, and so many more. Yeah, I love it. I just got this big, dumb smile on my face every time I hear this thing. Every time I listen to anything from this album, I just want to get up and start dancing. Like, it's just so fun. Like I said, if you aren't smiling, if you aren't dancing, if you aren't at least tapping your toes when this thing comes on, I'm going to assume you don't know how to have fun because you've never had fun, because this is just too much fun to ignore, to not have fun with it. And finally, let's start wrapping things up with His Happiness Shall Come First, Even Though We Are Suffering, from Backwash. Released October 31st independently through Bandcamp, not even on other digital platforms. This is the third and final installment in a semi-autobiographical series of records from Canadian trans rapper Backwash. Her experiences, combined with an anguished and nightmarish fusion of industrial, rap, and rock and electronic music, continue to paint a pretty harrowing and powerful picture. Her struggles with racism, transphobic family members, navigating the modern hellscape of this modern era continue to be urgent, continue to be poignant, continue to be important and impactful. And she has refined and elevated her style to, I think, the highest possible level yet, to the point where I'm not even sure where she can go from this point. I mean, there's just so much really inventive shit on here. I mean, I guess it's not groundbreaking by the standards of what she's done before, but like, I don't know, it's still just pretty unique altogether. Like, she's sampling, like, gothic choirs and keyboards and, like, classic metal riffs and guitar tones for, like, these really gnarly, abrasive, in-your-face, bloodthirsty kind of industrial rap jams and bangers. Her lyrics are cutthroat, her flow, her vocals, her screams, everything about her vocal presence is incredible. You can hear sirens wailing and, like, machinery breaking down, and it just adds to the really, like, strange, claustrophobic nightmare experience. Like, it really does feel like Backwash is kind of guiding us through some, like, twisted, dystopian, cybernetic, haunted mansion of the mind. The anger and fear and despair that she has dealt with all of her life just for being who she is used to extremely excruciating effect consistently across this album. Despite that, it's never like a painful album to listen to. I mean, it's difficult, but not like painful. At no point am I like, I need to turn this off, I need to stop. Like, the beats are hard enough and the songs are like fun enough from time to time that I'm still like invested and I'm still like entertained in a, you know, maybe not in a conventional sense, but nonetheless. I mean, some of those beats just go really hard. Like, there's a lot of, like, really heavy percussion, and I love a lot of the electronic stuff and, like, the guitar tones. Like, it just creates this really awesome vibe. I have no idea what Backwash continues to do after this, since this is the final installment in, as I said before, a trilogy, but I know that it's probably going to be wild. I'm so fucking pumped to see Backwash continue to grow and evolve, and I'm hoping that this album finally gets her the recognition and the fame that she absolutely deserves. And voila! That's it! My top 10 best non-metal albums of 2022. What are your favorite non-metal albums of 2022? What was your favorite hip-hop album? What was your favorite pop album? Your favorite country album? Your favorite alternative or indie rock album? Your favorite punk album? Let me know in the comments below. Please and thank you! Press this button to subscribe right here so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately. Look, even more videos. And as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.